Hello my bookish friends out there in BookTube land, and welcome to this episode of Tristan and the Classics, where we're taking a thoughtful look at the topic of grading books or rating books. We're all familiar with the 5-star rating system on Amazon and on Google, but how do you actually decide how to rate a book in comparison to another? Is there a way to discover maybe a book that has potentially more value than another book? Well, that's what we're taking a look at, and this video may even change the way you start considering the books you read. Can I just say one thing before we start? If an advert pops up right now, please stick around to carry on the video. I've got no control over where the advert comes, and lately it seems to come like 30 seconds into one of my videos, so stick around. I'll see you on the other side. So how do you go about rating your books? I want you to think about that for a moment. If you use Goodreads or you've ever left an Amazon review or whatever, do you ever run into the problem of you may have read 2 books which you think are really, really good, but you do consider one better than the other, and so you don't know how to make the second one a rating? It's not a 4-star book, but could I say it's equal to the 5-star book that I've read? And a lot of people come unstuck with this. Personally, I don't use a 5-star rating system because, as you're going to see, it has serious inadequacies, in my opinion. But as we go through these categories, give some real thought to how this can affect not only the way you rate books, or give you some light on perhaps having a more refined outlook on rating your books if you like this video, but also it gives you an approach technique for reading books as well if you're trying to read books thoughtfully. Just before I start, I do want to say I occasionally get some misdirected ire from people who say, "Stop telling us what books to read." I don't. There is no such thing as good books and bad books to read. If you like a certain kind of book, go ahead and read all of it. I am all for that. If you read for entertainment's sake, read what entertains you. My channel is just about the classics, and it's for those who are looking to maybe dip deeper and understand why certain books are judged to have more value than others. That does not mean, as you're going to see in this video, surprisingly, that they're necessarily more entertaining or pleasing to read. So, having said that, let's go in to 5 criteria that I use for judging or rating or ranking books. The first level on which to rate the books that you read is known as the lowest level, but it's the most common one, and that is the story. How good is the story? How gripping is it? How does it move you along? Is it full of twists and turns? Does it have great shocks? Does it build suspense? Is there a great cathartic release at the end where you just go, wow, that was amazing? All those things factor into books, and of course, primarily, every book should tell some kind of story. It should have some kind of plot, whether that's a deeply planned plot or whether it's a nucleus of an idea which is then explored in the pantser method. That's where authors talk about they write by the seat of their pants. They haven't plotted every single scene, say like Wilkie Collins does. They're just writing and seeing what the characters do, but they've got a nucleus of an idea of where it's going. Now, story, of course, that puts all books up for grabs. If you're rating purely on entertainment and thrill and story, then, that really comes a lot down to your personal inclination. And that's where those who say, stop telling us what to read. If you're just reading for entertainment, then granted, you rate it by how good the story is. And so there are some great stories out there. Now, I do the classic books, so I would think straight away of The Woman in White as a great story. What a plot. That's by Wilkie Collins, by the way. It's wonderful. But another great story, Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Just such a brilliant story. What else? Harry Potter. Loads of people like Harry Potter. Gripping story, uses all the tropes and twists of a gripping novel. Or sequence of novels. You might like 50 Shades of Grey because of the story or whatever it makes you feel. Not everyone's going to agree. And so if you go about rating books on purely story, that is fine. But do it consciously. And you can measure then, okay, which story if it was love, for instance, love-based, which story made me feel the twists and turns of a knotted love, of the obstacles overcome, of the sheer, maybe it's desire, maybe it's lust, maybe it's an engagement emotionally or mentally between characters. If it's a thriller, which one uses the greatest amount of ingenuity? Which one comes at a common genre from an oblique angle and introduces you to something new? Which one gives you the most satisfactory resolution? That's a really important part of judging a story, is the denouement of the story, how it's all pulled together and satisfyingly concluded. Now, if you just have those things in mind and you want to rate it purely on how good a story is it, then that's great. And I would say a 5-star rating system works really well in that. If you find one story is a 5-star and so is another, but you think one's better, just make that clear in your review description. But now we're going to come on to a few more things to consider in weighing the value of a book, in really rating them higher and higher in comparison to their peers. So the second aspect that I use for rating or ranking a book compared to others is the writing itself. How good is the writing and the writing style? Now, again, this is subjective. What is good writing? Well, you can talk about grammar, but surely if you're describing the way people talk in characters, many people don't talk with absolute pristine grammar. In fact, I don't think there's a single person who actually does speak with perfect grammar at all times. But if you love grammar, if you find that elevates the speech, if it makes it clearer, and less confusing, which is pretty much the idea behind grammar, to make a meaning really crystal clear, then of course you would factor that in. But when I think of writing, I'm talking normally about the lucidity, the eloquence, the ingenuity of writing, the vivacity of writing. Certain authors have such a colourful way of talking, or sometimes a briskness of talking, which just bounces you along. So authors like Dumas are exceptional at that. Read The Three Musketeers. Fantastic book. Great story. Brilliant narration. Just beautiful writing which just keeps you bouncing constantly. It maintains the urgency all the way through the story. And that's a skill in writing. Holding urgency is vital for getting a good book, a really good book. But there are other writers as well. Robert Louis Stevenson, mentioned him a moment ago. P.G. Wodehouse, Evelyn Waugh. Who else would you say? Balzac. Love Balzac. Fantastic writer. Eliot. Beautiful. It's the eloquence of Eliot. And yeah, the lucidity. With the shortness of use of words, it's just marvellous. I really enjoy that. We're looking at Mill on the Floss in my Patreon group this month, and we've just analysed chapter 1. Just such effortlessly smooth writing to inhale. It just pours through the eyes without effort and makes you feel deeply. It's this writing that lifts up the emotions very, very quickly. But ingenuity is also a great feature of writing. I love a good phrase. I love a good twist of the use of language or the kookiness of the character speaking. Now, to that end, I want to give an example of this, and that is P.G. Wodehouse. Is there a better wordsmith in literature other than Shakespeare? Wodehouse said he'd put himself in the Shakespeare class. He said, he could really hit them through the covers when he got his eye in. That's an expression from cricket. And he was only joking, putting himself on par with Shakespeare. But Wodehouse does really, really turn a phrase and write in such an effortlessly beautiful style, but comic. So, I'm going to read you a paragraph from Jeeves in the Offing. Now, in this scene, Worcester, the main character, has been talking to his friend Reginald Kipper Herring, and he's told him a story to explain the way out of a situation. But then, this paragraph, Worcester turns to you, the reader, you and me, to sort of explain how the story had an effect on his friend who heard it. Just listen to this writing. I don't know if you happen to take old Dr. Gordon's bile magnesia, which, when the liver is disordered, gives instant relief, acting like magic and imparting an inward glow. I don't myself, my personal liver being always more or less in mid-season form, but I've seen the advertisements. They show the sufferer before and after taking. In the first case, with drawn face and hollow eyes and the general look of one shortly about to hand in his dinner pail. In the second, all beans and book and what the French call bien autre. Well, what I'm driving at is that my amazing story had exactly the same effect on Kipper as the Daily Dose for adults. Isn't that just exquisite? I talked about an oblique angle. What a way to write. What a way to get a character to talk. And if you break down a lot of his phraseology, there's ever so slight twists in the normal expression. What did he say? All fizz and buck, was it? You know, just beautiful, evocative language, yet at the same time not ornamented, grandiose, beautiful language. Because that's not who Worcester is. He's a bit of your typical English effete buffoon kind of thing. But that is sublime writing, and that's why Wodehouse, for instance, is classed as classic. You know, he's got nothing deep within his stories, but his sheer use of writing, and his plots are pretty much all the same, but his use of writing elevates him into a very rarefied atmosphere of writers. Hardly anyone would dare try and copy Wodehouse. In fact, there are numbers of authors who refuse to read Wodehouse before they write because they feel so inadequate as writers when they do. So that was the second aspect, the writing itself. How good do you feel it is? What effect does it have on you? The third aspect that I use for rating books is the third aspect that I personally consider when rating books against each other that I've read is the level of insight or observation into life, character, or society. So insight and observation. When reading a book, some authors, some stories, some novels just suddenly make you aware of a facet of your day-to-day living. Now, it could be the disposition of people. So, for instance, Dickens was incredibly insightful into what makes a character. You read Dickens' characters and you recognise them in your own life. He has this way of getting down to idiosyncrasies which others miss, but as soon as he points it out, you go, oh yeah, that's why. Now, others will take that even deeper. Just to say about Dickens, brilliant insight into the childish mind. He understands how children see things. He has a very acute insight into social justice movements and why certain institutions are so oppressive, what it is about them. He sort of pierces beneath the skin level. But Eliot, George Eliot, she's another one that has extraordinary insight. She has an insight on how community works. The value of it, its effect, the place of environment acting upon individuals. Émile Zola, the French writer, the French naturalist writer, the same, very big on how the environment, and sometimes you suddenly get awakened to, wow, do you know what, I think that might be true of me. My environment is similar. It's cause and effect. There's me thinking I just am who I am and I've developed it, but look at these outward influences. Others observe behaviours in groups or even in society as a whole. So a great example of that, an author I really like, is Anne Bronte in both Agnes Grey, but specifically in The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Now, Anne Bronte's Tenant of Wildfell Hall, what an extraordinary piece of perception she shows in that book. She shows the role of education on the outcomes of little boys and little girls. What's expected of a girl, prim, proper, moral, chaste, all that. But that education tells a boy that he should become a bit of a rake and get all the badness out of his system and then become a gentleman. And you see a man, the protagonist's husband, who is awful, like dreadful character, but she's sympathetic in the sense of, she doesn't ever justify him, but she's sympathetic in that if he's raised according to these ideas of how to raise boys to become men, you are going to get reprobates, you are going to get drunkenness, gamblers, womanizers. You can't just give free range. Now that book, I thought it was great, but here's an interesting thing. If I were to rate The Tenant of Wildfowl Hall on, say, a story level and compared it to The Moonstone by Wilkie Adams. In fact, let's compare it to Harry Potter. On a story level, if I was to get on a train and have some story, modern story, like Harry Potter, for instance, or I could read The Tenant of Wildfowl Hall, and I just want a thrill, a good read while I'm on the train, a good story, you'd probably go for Harry Potter, okay? But when it comes to the story and the writing and the observation and insight, which still exists today, then I would rate The Tenant of Wildfowl Hall infinitely higher than Harry Potter's works. Do you understand how that's rating them? You don't have to like a story more in order to rate it higher. Some books have other things within them that give you a stronger sense of reality, a stronger sense of your place, a stronger sense of how the world actually works, rather than just entertainment and escapism. Now, you can, of course, factor in exciting thrillers with insight and observation, and what that does is it then raises them in their genre. I'm going to read you a section now, as I will with all these points, and this section is from Sherlock Holmes. It's always the book I go to. I could talk about many of his books, but this one is Study in Scarlet. I always reference it. Sherlock Holmes has just walked into a scene, studied the scene. There's some writing on a wall. There's a dead body on the floor. He looked at a few things on the way into the house. And although it's a mystery to everyone else, he's worked out who they're looking for like that. And you think, wow, is it possible? Now watch the astuteness of observation that Conan Doyle must have to insert into Sherlock, which makes him an outstanding character amongst other detectives. So, Watson says, are you sure you've got it right? You're that confident in your conclusions? And this is what he says. There is no room for a mistake, he answered. The very first thing which I observed on arriving there was that a cab had made 2 ruts with its wheels close to the curb. Now, up to last night, we have had no rain for a week, so that those wheels which left such a deep impression must have been there during the night. There were the marks of the horse's hooves too, the outline of one of which was far more clear-cut than that of the other 3, showing that that was a new shoe. Since the cab was there after the rain began and was not there at any time during the morning, I have Gregson's word for that, it follows that it must have been there during the night, and therefore that it brought those 2 individuals to the house. Well, that seems simple enough, said I, but how about the other man's height? Why, the height of a man, in 9 cases out of 10, can be told from the length of his stride. It is a simple calculation enough, though there is no use my boring you with figures. I had this fellow stride both on the clay outside and on the dust within. Then I had a way of checking my calculation. When a man writes on a wall, his instinct leads him to write about the level of his own eyes. Now that writing was just over 6 feet from the ground. It was child's play. Now, that's not the most exciting passage. I could have picked loads from just that one book. But do you see the clearness of observation? And can you see how that then builds Conan Doyle's reputation, that has elevated Sherlock Holmes to the great classic detective? He beats Poirot, he beats Marple in his sheer abductive reasoning because of the incredible observation that Conan Doyle had in real life. If you've never read any Sherlock Holmes, read it. You might think it's all contrived. Wow, it's hard to debate his conclusions when you see how clinically astute Conan Doyle was in framing the resolution of a crime through the clues. And we're not talking just lucky clues. We're talking things that require really detailed observation of the things around you. So there's the third point. We've had good story, then the calibre of the writing, and now What insights does it give you about noticing the world? Just to say about Sherlock Holmes, if you read a few Sherlock Holmes, you would want to go out and start practicing your powers of observation. It's that influential because you realise that the human mind can do it. It's just our eyes have never been open to it before. That takes an extraordinary kind of book and an extraordinary kind of author. The fourth category that I use when grading or rating books that I read, again, is a step up from the three that come before it. And that is an exploration of meaning or ideas or psychology of characters, maybe even worldviews and philosophies. You know, in some respects, and I should do a video on this, the novelist is the philosopher's critique. Because they'll take ideas, they'll take morals, values, the things that tend to belong to philosophy. And instead of just putting them on paper and making them theory, which you can force to work, some novelists, and great novels, will take these ideas and explore them through a character or a group of characters. Try to put them in real-time situations and then let the character take over. If you've never done much writing, you may not be aware that characters literally take over an author. They will begin to behave not the way the author's expecting. It's very unusual how all that works, but it's true. And so these psychological insights, particularly the psychological books, they are at another level again to just story and just good writing. When I say just, of course, those are not easy to get on their own anyway. So characters that would be in this, Thomas Hardy, love Thomas Hardy, really explores meaning, really explores suffering, really explores the influence of the environment, I suppose, on us, but, you know, our place, our little spot, almost, you know, oblivion that is in front of us. You've got Eliot, again, extraordinary observer of life, but explores the ideas of people and explores the ideas of collectives. So in her rural societies, like in Middlemarch. Then you've got Dostoevsky. My, is he the best of the psychological writers? Maybe. He really takes the philosophies of his day and religion and forces them into a character and then says, get to work, character. The brothers Karamazov, you have different philosophical ideas all confronting one another. He's testing them. He's putting them in a crucible of thought and action. And the result leaves you somewhat breathless. Now, again, let's take Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. Would I choose to read that on a train journey compared to Treasure Island by Louis Stevenson? Probably not, unless I really want to, you know, get involved in psychology and meaning and life. But on a train journey, I want a good story. So I'd never rate Crime and Punishment higher than Treasure Island for just that reason. But as a whole book, rating it according to its writing, to its insight, to its observation, to the tangle of psychological thoughts that you've got to unpick and take on yourself, yeah, Dostoevsky destroys Treasure Island. You know, I'm going to rate it as a higher value book. Of course I am. And so, you know, there are plenty of other writers who do that. You think of Camus, the French writer, sort of existentialist with The Stranger and The Plague. He's got that kind of stuff as well going on. And so that is another level altogether. So when you go into reading a book, ask yourself that question. Does this explore, is the author sharing with me their experience and their outlook through a character which may shed light on the life around me? Or even better, have they gone one higher and they're trying to keep themselves out of it and let a character really get into the nitty-gritty of what it's like to be a capitalist, what it's like to be a communist, what it's like to be religious, what it's like to be atheist, what morals are, what immorality is, all those things. That takes a very skilled writer, and normally some can try to do that, but the writing lets them down, and so it all falls apart, or they're not good enough at the observations to really critique a worldview or values. but some authors get it just right. And the example I'm going to read actually is Dostoevsky. This is just excellent, what I'm about to read you. So this one is Crime and Punishment, and one of the characters, the main character's friends, is Razumihim, and he stands for sort of reason and logic, but not just plain logic, reason, factoring in everything. And what's happening here is Dostoevsky is really getting us to realise that philosophies are all well and good, ideas are good coming out of a university, but you put them under the pressure of real life and let's see what happens. Now, this isn't going to give you the full explanation, but just an idea of a book that forces you to confront things, forces you to mentally tussle. So this is how it goes. What answer had your lecturer in Moscow to make to the question why he was forging notes? Everybody is getting rich one way or another, so I want to make haste to get rich too. I don't remember the exact words, but the upshot was that he wanted money for nothing without waiting or working. We've grown used to having everything ready-made, to walking on crutches, to having our food chewed for us. Then the great hour struck, and every man showed himself in his true colours. But morality, and so to speak, principles. But why do you worry about that? Raskolnikov interposed suddenly. It's in accordance with your theory. Why, carry out logically the theory you were advocating just now, and it follows that people may be killed. Upon my word, cried Luzhin. No, that's not so, put in Zosimov. And then the argument carries on. Do you see what he's doing in this book? He's got a group of students. They're learning from their professors and there's certain ideas coming out, but what's happening is Raskolnikov and Razumihim both attacking, the philosophy says this, however, in practicality, is that what takes place? You know, the great hour struck and every man revealed his true colours. You have the theory, but then when the opportunity presents itself, will they be self-serving? And he goes on to explore that more fully. What a great, great book. Harder to read than lots of books. Not one you just go to for a good read, a story. But if you engage with it, if you wrestle with it, if you take the time to take it in, to become Raskolnikov, to experience the guilt, the oppressive feeling of conscience, the ever-present threat of being rumbled for your crime, you come away at the end of it, with a deep realization of ideas. You may not grasp the philosophy necessarily, but great overarching ideas about ourselves are revealed in that kind of literature. And that's why Dostoevsky and those kind of writers, the psychological writers, are ranked right up there. Because when you engage with them, their books don't just give you a plot. They don't just give you beautiful writing. They may not be as well written as Wodehouse, because I don't think hardly anyone is. But they are way more valuable, they are way more taxing, they are way more rewarding than other books around them. And now we're in the realm of the great classics with a capital C rather than the lowercase c. So let's come to the final aspect, and the greatest one in my opinion, of how I rate and rank books that I read. So the fifth criterion that I use for rating books against one another, when I decide which books do I personally think are the best amongst which I've read, it's the ones, it sort of combines with the psychology but just bumps to a slightly higher level. It's the ones that reveal the grandeur of life, of existence, and the sheer potentiality that's trapped within us. That if we could just tap into that we could extract a juice, an elixir, a compound, a potent medicine, which is so powerful that almost nothing would be unachievable if we could just get down to it. Now, authors that grasp life in the big scope, that would be ones like Tolstoy, of course. You read Anna Karenina? Well, you read War and Peace and you've got such a vast array of characters and so much observation and insight going on. And then you're positioned one moment in society, but then drawn back into the whole array of European politics. Anna Karenina, there's this beautiful, beautiful scene where Levin goes and works with the peasants all day and into the twilight, scything down the crops. And there's something overawing about, of course, the only way he can do this is he uses beautiful writing. I can only imagine what it's like in Russian. I read it in English and it's like blows my mind. So Tolstoy would be one. Dostoevsky, yeah, I'd put him up there for sure. He's one of the greats. He gets you to see, he's the one that gets you inwardly to see your potentials and the problems and the errors inside the human soul and psyche. Other characters, James Joyce, stretching Ulysses, this massive book over just 24 hours with all sorts of different techniques within it, which I'm still trying to learn to appreciate more fully now. Who else would there be? Steinbeck. Now, that might shock some of you. Steinbeck. I read Steinbeck, and for me, life just sort of grows like a nimbus before me, flashing and thundering in all its power. Who else? There's Melville. Oh, Herman Melville. Moby Dick. Not the easiest read, but some of the best language. Some of the most brilliant writing. Talk about vividness. Talk about eloquence. Talk about almost perfection at times. But not only that, the grand scope. Now, of course, he uses the environment with the sea and your little place in it on the Pequod. Very symbolic. But there's a grandness of personality through all the crew. You think of Queequeg. It starts off, you think of him as somewhat of a comic figure, but he embodies so much. And the way he acts and feels and the effect he has on Ishmael just watching him. And then you've got the more critical Starbuck. But even so, he's a very, very live character. And we see this whole sweep of human interaction. And then, of course, you've got Captain Ahab and his monomania against the whale. There's so much in that book. And that's why it's termed a great classic, because you could say there's psychology, there's clearly insights, there's a beauty of language which puts to your mouth the things you feel but have never been able to say. As soon as you hear it, you just think, that's so right. There's a phrase in Moby Dick, which I love. It's always stuck with me. He talks about the sign. This is right at the beginning in Nantucket. There's a sign to the pub or the hotel, can't remember. And it says it had an antique squeak. What a great phrase. And when I heard that, I just thought, yeah, I know exactly what that means. That was the power of observation and beautiful language. But like I say, it's took it to a grander level. Now, of course, there is one character who supersedes even all of these, and that's none other than the great dramatist Shakespeare. And am I prejudiced? I do love him, but I don't think I'm prejudiced. I just think he is superb. He captures life. He captures humanity. He captures soul and spirit and everything. I'm going to read you a section, but before I do, if you want to hear just a small snippet of one of his characters showing the shortness, brevity, futility of a life that is rich, then have a look at the Kingmaker's speech in the play. Is it Henry IV? It's Henry VI, part 1, I believe. And the Kingmaker is this powerful noble. I have a video on this under my Shakespeare Explained playlist. Go and watch it. I'm not all pep and ginger. It was early days when I was doing YouTube. It doesn't even have 400 views, yet it's one of the best videos in the sense that what Shakespeare talks about is just beautiful. It's a very short speech. And if you think you don't understand Shakespeare, I'll explain it line by line in that video. I'll put a link below. Watch that video for seeing how Shakespeare gives you the grandness of life by highlighting its futility and brevity. It makes you realise, wow, I am but a speck. And it has a powerful, it almost gives you a feeling of wanting to be sick, but not in a, that was horrible, but in a irresistibly true statement. It highlights your mortality, and it's something to behold. But for this one, I'm going to read you from Hamlet, a really famous little passage. I'm not going to read the whole soliloquy, but here's Hamlet, will he take on his uncle who has killed his father, or will he just exist and put up with it like some coward or wimp? Look at the words. Look at how Shakespeare pulls a spirit out of somebody, the motivating light or flame. To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep, no more. And by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. And then he says, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Just what exquisite writing. If that didn't strike you, just backspace this video 30 seconds and listen to those words again. He captures the depth of humanity. You feel your own greatness of soul expanding when you read the works of Shakespeare. And that is what makes him great. And so he may not be as easy to read as, John Dickson Carr's The Hollow Man, which, by the way, I think is a great book, but infinitely greater. We're talking the plot, which wasn't his, he sort of semi-stole it. We've got the writing in here, the insight into life and living, the observations of the world around him, the psychological twists and turns of all of his main characters, and then the sheer scope of eternity and us. And that, is why I would rank him 5 stars if I were to use this whole criteria. And I haven't been on Goodreads for a long time, but unless they've put in various categories to rate books by, I think that's what they should do. Instead of just saying, what rating is this, 1 star to 5 star, have a bunch of categories like these, and then put stars within that. How good's the story? How good's the observation? How good's the insight? How good's the psychological twists and turns? And the exploration of meaning and values? How good's the writing? And then it could work out a score based on that, and people could really begin to assess a book. From your perspective, of course, because it's always subjective. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. What do you think? If nothing else, I hope that this gives you an approach to books, improves your going into them and consciously looking about and learning from the craft of the author, learning from what they have to share. Because if we only take story, it's very easy to get into a book like Crime and Punishment and throw it away after 50 pages and be like, that's rubbish, okay? But you're missing out on some of the greatest literature out there. So maybe, I do think this should sort of be taught in schools a bit more. Anyway, that's enough from me. Leave me your thoughts down below. Are there any criteria you add? There are other things I could talk about, but I just thought I'd keep it to those 5. And until the next time, I wish you joy in your reading.